Breaking news, Danny Garcia breaks his silence on his TKO loss to Erislandy Lara, where he's receiving a whole lot of backlash for quitting. Danny Garcia said, quote, "Came off a 2-year layoff, jumped up to middleweight, and tried to be great. I lost, but I'm a winner in life. I've never been afraid to be great. Appreciate everyone for the love and support." End of the quote. I always find it funny how fighters immediately after the fight say, "No excuses, he was the better man." And then the next day, they start making excuses. Well, Danny Garcia was not an exception. That's exactly what he did. Now, even though Danny may feel everything he said is a fact, he came off a long layoff and he moved up to middleweight. The reality is Danny Garcia only moved up 3 pounds because the fight was at a catch weight of 157 pounds. Additionally, Lara himself has not been that active. Leading up to the fight, Danny Garcia did admit that this fight was a great opportunity due to the fact normally he can't win a title at middleweight, but because this fight is at a catch weight, additionally, Lara himself is a 154-pounder. He recently moved up. On top of all of that, Lara is nearly 42 years old. He's a couple months removed from being 42. That's why Danny Garcia felt that this was a great opportunity. Essentially, Lara is a grandpa. He's the oldest champion in the sport of boxing today for a reason. Therefore, that was a huge turnaround, a whole 180, a U-turn for Danny Garcia to go from saying this is a great opportunity to catch Lara when he's almost 42 to now feel like he was at a disadvantage against a 42 years old guy when Danny Garcia is 6 years younger. I hear a lot of people say that Danny Garcia was not in the fight. He looked discouraged. Well, it's because of what Lara was doing. Danny Garcia was discouraged because Lara took him to the Cuban school, a school that he never got introduced to the whole entire time he's been boxing. That's a whole different school that he never knew about. Lara took him to that school. That's why he looked out of the fight from round 1. I guarantee you this, if Danny Garcia was fighting Benavidez or a Mexican-style fighter, he wouldn't have looked the way he did against Lara. The reason why Danny looked that way, discouraged and everything, is because of what Lara was doing. Remember, Lara beat Canelo 8 rounds to 4. Canelo robbed Erislandy Lara like he robbed majority of his opponents when the fights were close. In fact, you can make a case that Erislandy Lara is still undefeated. A lot of the fights he lost were really close that could have went either way. Especially the Canelo fight. Lara clearly won that fight, 8 rounds to 4. Due to how good Lara is, I already knew this was going to be a difficult fight for Danny Garcia. That's why I picked Lara to win, even though he's 41 years old, about to be 42. The reason why is because Danny Garcia is a counterpuncher by nature. He's flat-footed. So how the hell are you going to beat Lara being flat-footed and waiting on Lara to make a mistake so you could counter? That's not going to happen. You have to force Lara to make a mistake in order to catch him. And I just couldn't see Danny Garcia being able to do that. That's why during the fight, the commentary was so racially biased on DAZN and on Amazon Prime, to the point where people were surprised that Lara dropped Danny Garcia out of nowhere. You see, it felt like the knockdown came out of nowhere due to the fact that the biased commentators were too busy slandering Lara instead of doing their freaking job calling the shots, the vicious shots that Lara was landing on Danny Garcia. That's why Danny Garcia was discouraged immediately the moment Lara started touching him up. The speed, the timing, the accuracy, the power, the whole package that Lara brought to the table, along with his skills at the Cuban school, had Danny Garcia puzzled. And by the time he dropped Danny Garcia, Danny had already received a lot of punishment. He was already hurt before. He just had a good poker face. Now, the knockdown wouldn't have been a surprise at that point if the commentators were actually doing their freaking job, calling the blow by blow, calling the shots that Lara was landing instead of ignoring it to push their agenda, their personal agenda. I mean, on the zone, they went as far as dissing Rigondeaux while calling the Lara versus Danny Garcia fight, comparing Lara to Rigondeaux. The crazy part about that, Rigondeaux is one of the greatest amateurs and pro fighters of all time. And he was one of the nicest and sickest fighters you ever seen. So for Sergio Mora, who is more of a boxer than both Rigondeaux and Lara, with less power, way less power, for him to sit there and not check his crew on that is crazy. Clearly, Rigondeaux and Lara just happen to have the wrong complexion. Even Amazon Prime commentators, for example, Alberstein, he be making me feel like we back in the 1900s or something. If a fighter on the coincidental list is fighting, he will criticize them for anything. However, if a fighter on the hope list is fighting, he will not criticize them for excessive holding, excessive movement, or anything of that sort like he does for the fighters on the coincidental list. It ain't a coincidence. I remember when Alberstein was doing the commentary for Floyd versus Pacquiao, and Floyd held Pacquiao for the first time. During a sequence where Pacquiao threw himself on Floyd, all of a sudden, Alberstein is talking about, it's going to be interesting to see if the referee allows Floyd Mayweather to hold without taking a point. And I'm thinking like, really? You guys have to realize, at that moment, Pacquiao threw himself on Floyd, so Floyd really had no choice but to smother Pacquiao because Pacquiao was smothering him. So this was not a situation where Floyd went out of his way to clinch Pacquiao. Absolutely not. And it wasn't excessive. Floyd barely held or clinched Pacquiao, especially early on. Few years later, in fact, recently, a year or two back, a fighter on the Hope list was fighting. I don't even know his name, but I stayed and watched the fight because I wanted to hear Alberstein criticize this fighter, since this fighter was clinching excessively. I'm talking about he was clinching more than Kell Brook did against Sean Porter. I never seen someone clinch as much as this guy did. And would you guys believe Alberstein never criticized or said anything about clinching or the referee taking a point like he did with Floyd. And Floyd wasn't even doing excessive holding. However, this guy, he was clinching 30 to 40 times a round. That's how bad it was. But some way, somehow, Alberstein said nothing about clinching. They only do that to the fighters on the coincidental list. In fact, the commentators even defended this guy, talking about clinching is part of the game. That's the sweet science. And I'm like, really? All of a sudden, now it's the sweet science. But when the fighters on the coincidental list do it, they are cowards. They don't want to fight. However, when the fighters on the hope list do that 10 times more, they say they are intelligent. They are skillful. This is part of the game. Boxing one-on-one. We all know what time it is. It's all about the yin and the yang to these guys. Last but not least, Danny Garcia is receiving a whole lot of backlash for quitting. Now, some of the greatest fighters of all time quit too, like Chavez Sr., Duran, Nomas, etc., etc., etc. So let's not pick and choose who you guys say is a quitter and who's not. I mean, you do have to admire warriors like Errol Spence, Muhammad Ali, even Deontay Wilder, fighters who are willing to die in the ring in order to win. They either want to win or get KO'd. Go out on their shields. You have to respect the warrior aspect of the sport of boxing. But I can't criticize anybody who want to take care of their health. If a fighter at some point during the fight realizes there is no way they could win the fight and decides to quit because of their health, then more power to them. I can't criticize that because your health is your wealth. After all, you do have to save the fighter from himself if he's not willing to save himself. For example, Muhammad Ali, his last few fights, his corner should have had saved him from himself. Ali was just laying in the corner taking punishment. Clearly, he didn't have it no more. In fact, by that point, they ended up finding out he already had Parkinson. So you don't want to end up having Parkinson because you too much of a warrior. In Danny Garcia's case, even though he has not been in many wars like Ali did or even close to that, but the thing about Danny Garcia, his heart was not in the game anymore. Clearly, he's doing it for the money. Of course, the legacy came with the package. However, the moment Lara started touching Danny Garcia up, the legacy went out of the window. So I can't be mad at Danny Garcia because he decided that his health is more important. It's one thing if Danny had a chance of winning the fight, but it's another when you know 100% you're about to lose. Of course, you got to respect fighters like Errol Spence who rather go out on his shield. That's a real warrior, a throwback, old school type of warrior. However, that's when the referee or the corner have to protect the fighter from himself. But I cannot criticize a fighter who values his health more than going out on his shield. Therefore, quitting is subjective because a lot of fighters quit. Like I said, Chavez, Durant, some of the greatest fighters of all time, only few didn't. And that's like the greatest top 10, top 20 fighters of all time and few others. Few other legendary fighters like Errol Spence. But like I said before, the Muhammad Ali's, that's a type of mindset that made him the greatest of all time. Willing to die in the ring. That being said, go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Subscribe below. And to be continued on the next episode of Akhi TV. Peace out. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.